Hi, welcome to a brief overview about the changes to the California MFT exam outline that went into place in 2021, January 2021. So before we get started on the changes, I just wanted to mention a little bit for people the background of the Therapist Development Center and why we are, I think, uniquely positioned to address changes that occasionally happen with the testing process. TDC, I started TDC, it's been about 15 years ago now, because I had a background in learning and in particular about testing and different ways that information is tested. And I was always a very good test taker, and I did really well on the medical school exam, and at one point actually taught test prep for Kaplan and Princeton Review for different tests, including the medical school exam, the MCAT, the dental exam, and the GRE. So with that knowledge and experience that I had when I went to study for the licensing exams, I recognized very quickly that most of the other preps out there that existed were very content heavy and didn't actually teach the clinical strategies and clinical thinking skills that ultimately the test was testing when I went to see the test itself. So that really motivated me, along with the fact that I felt like people were failing the exam after spending a lot of money on these other programs and not realizing that they would have passed had they been taught the material in a way that was actually relevant to the test. So really the goal of Therapist Development Center has always been to help people become better clinicians, and knowing that this opportunity for a test is really an opportunity to solidify all of your clinical skills. And I know it can be a stressful process, but I've always been someone who's loved tests because it really forced me to really feel like I knew what I was doing, no matter what the class was. I recently went through an old box of stuff from college and found a test from one of my biology classes in college, and I couldn't believe how much I knew back then. I was on developmental biology, and I thought, God, it was so fun to have to learn all of this information and then take a test and really demonstrate that I knew it. So I really hope that when people go into taking this test, if you can reframe it as a positive experience, that is going to really help you manage your anxiety, and it's going to help you to be more motivated and kind of lean into your studying. So now I want to just mention our program was organized with this concept of the top 50, and we did that instead of following the outline of the BBS, specifically because we knew that things were going to change. And the top 50 really allowed for approach that was more organic and more relevant to clinical practice. So a great example is domestic violence. Issues with domestic violence would be tested across all the different domains, from legal and ethical to treatment planning to diagnosing. And instead of teasing it out in each of those subsections, we just look at domestic violence like you would and with a client and address all of those issues in a given topic. So that allows us in times like this when tests change to really be responsive and responsive and adaptive to those changes. So one of the things I just want to say to people who are currently studying with our program, and certainly people that haven't started yet as of January 2021, but you do not need to worry about these changes. This is something that happens all the time where people are studying or thinking about it and they hear some change is about to happen and it spikes everyone's anxiety and throws everyone into a tizzy. And there's absolutely no reason for that. This is just a minor change that anyone taking the test, I could take the test 2 months ago and take it today, and I probably would not have any awareness that the change had taken place because there's 170 questions on there, and they're always running a group of experimental questions, and you don't know which ones those are, and you don't know what percentage they could be heavy on diagnosing, or they could be heavy on different things, and you wouldn't be able to recognize a difference in the overall makeup of the test with the new changes. So that's the first thing I want to say is the changes really are not significant at all. It's just a shifting of certain types of problems, categories of problems, and a few topics that are new. So The next thing I want to just add is that we are going to address those new things, the new items that are on the test that they've added. We have already put some questions in place. Some of that stuff we've already incorporated, things related to the military, things related to social media, are topics that we were already including in our materials because we had heard that they were coming up, and they were parts of just everyday life. Like, people are going to see military clients. Before, the military wasn't a formal line item on the outline, but now it is. So we were ahead of the game with that respect. We're just going to make sure that we cover the key things in our materials so that people can rest assured that it's covered. But now I just want to move into what are the biggest changes to the new exam outline. And the first one is the organization of content. So, for example, the legal and ethical issues were previously separate domains, but now they're together. So legal and ethical issues are now a single domain. The next one is diagnosis was previously part of clinical evaluation, but now that's its own category. So this is just like remodeling the house. The house is the same size, everything. We're making the bedroom into a den, or we're splitting, putting a wall up between diagnosing and clinical evaluation. So again, this does not affect at all your experience of the test or really your studying. So one of the other things that changed is the number of questions per each category. So there are a handful more clinical evaluation questions. There are going to be a few more diagnosis questions. And one of the things to note here is that the outline uses language that really aligns with our differential approach. So we really focus on the differential diagnoses. So how are two different diagnoses different from each other? When would you pick one over the other? That's what the test is really wanting to get at. When is something bipolar? When is it cyclothymia? When is it major depression? When is it bereavement? Those kind of things. So this differential diagnosis is spelled out more in the new outline. Crisis management has 2 fewer questions. Treatment planning, which is also considered case conceptualization and planning, this reduced questions from 30 to 18. But then treatment increased by the same number. So there was just a shift from treatment planning over to treatment, which, honestly makes sense because the bulk of what we do is the actual treatment. And a lot of times people are stronger at an assessment phase of kind of making a treatment plan together. But the test, I think, is going to shift towards addressing issues that come up more in the middle phase of treatment, which is the bulk of where we're going to see our clients. And then the legal and ethical questions decreased pretty significantly from 42 to 15. But one thing to note on legal and ethical issues is that these are always at play. You're always incorporating, behaving in a legal and ethical manner with regards to these other categories. I think one of the reasons that they reduced it to this degree is that because of the new legal and ethical test that people had to pass, the BBS is saying, look, we've already gotten people over this first hurdle. Let's focus more on their concrete clinical skills. As far as the new categories that were not clearly identified in the past exam outlines, the main ones what we found are, first of all, social media, which makes sense because this really has blossomed as an issue in the last decade. And certainly it's only expanded rapidly, especially its impact on young people, as more and more young people get access to devices at a younger age. And there's more and more outlets for them to communicate and participate in a socially connected world. So this is a huge issue, and certainly mental health providers are seeing this as a huge issue. So it makes a lot of sense that the test is going to ask some questions about, identifying. There's definitely been discussion about looking at an addiction, including social media addiction and device addiction for people. And and whether that will be down the road in the future, but certainly looking at the different ways to use people's usage of social media as a gauge for your assessment, and then looking at ways to treat treat issues related to it, plus the impact it has on mental health as far as people's exposure or bullying across social media platforms. So this is definitely a good addition, I think, for all of us to have awareness of, and it makes sense that the test added this. Trauma has a greater emphasis in this new outline. And again, that makes sense. I mean, because trauma is really one of the fundamental things that alter people's mental health as far as an environmental impact. Obviously, people have a biological predisposition to certain aspects, but it's a traumatic experience that can trigger and bring forth some of those vulnerabilities. And even for people who don't, trauma is going to be a major it has a major impact on mental health. And it makes sense, again, because of the impact, that it would be something that the BBS wants to emphasize. Remember, all of this is based on surveys of people in the field and looking at what they spend most of their time dealing with clinically. And then the last area that's has expanded is looking at the diverse populations, and in particular, emphasis on immigrants, military, people involved in the legal system, sexual or gender identity issues, and just general changes to language that we use in working with that population. For example, microaggressions. So we'll be adding sections. These three will be added to our top 50 category. It'll be called, change the name to top 50 plus, and this will be the plus. These questions, if you see any of these questions on these new areas, these three new areas I just mentioned, they will all be experimental because they have to norm the questions first to see how people do. When you write a question, you have an intent on what that question is testing, but sometimes it's not actually understood. You can be testing something other than what you think you're testing. And so you have to run it through and see what's the most common, and how many people get it right, first of all. And then if people get it wrong, what's the most common wrong answer they pick? Why might they do that? And sometimes maybe a majority of people get it wrong and they pick the wrong answer. They all pick the same wrong answer. That tells you that the test question isn't testing what you originally thought it was testing. So one of the things that really sets our program apart, because I have this background in learning and testing, all of our test questions, when we write them, are written by a minimum of 3 people, and one person writes the question. Somebody else takes it blindly without knowing in advance what the right answer is, and then we see if we get it right or if we get it wrong. And if we get it wrong, we go back and say, well, what would it need to be changed to be right? What was the intent? And then we will tweak it. Sometimes we'll say it's too easy if they get it right. If it's too easy, we'll say, okay, well, how could we make it more challenging? If we get it wrong, and what we're really trying to do is make it hard enough that that it struggles for them to get it right, because that's how it's going to be on the test. These test questions are going to they're written to really make you think. So once the second person has reviewed it and gone back and gotten feedback with the first person, then finally, we put a test together and we have somebody else on our team take that final draft version. And then the 3 people will sit down and look at the score and do a final tweak on that. And then on the back end of our test, once we actually put a question up, we keep statistics on the back end of questions so that we can see what is the difficulty level and we can know. And then anytime we add new questions, what we do is we will go in and pull out the easiest questions and swap in the new content into questions that everybody gets right. I mean, there's some questions on the test, on our practice test and the actual practice test, that everyone gets right. They're just straightforward questions. It could be like a diagnosis question or some legal and ethical question that you would hope, if someone's going to pass the test, that everybody gets it right. Well, those will be the ones that we swap out. And really, that's the intent of our program, is that it gets harder as you go along, so that the final couple mocks, particularly our second to last mock, We purposely make it really, really difficult because we want you to have a challenging experience with us, so that when you actually go in to take the real test, we don't want that real test to be a lot harder than our test. We want it to be at least the same, if not easier. So I just want to mention our pass rate, as always, continues to be very high. A big reason for this is because we are constantly tweaking our program. We have a post-exam survey, and we include in there, are there any topics that we haven't included and that you think need to be added? And whenever somebody mentions something that we haven't seen before, we are on it, and we will add questions that cover that material. And we just want to all say, the team, to everyone listening who's purchased our program, thank you for trusting us with your test prep. It has been a joy and such a pleasure to be a resource to all the mental health providers out there that are working towards, making the world a better place by helping everyone. There's a lot of people suffering in the world right now, and the mental health providers are the ones that are on the front lines. And now more than ever with COVID, we need people that are well-trained and confident in their skills. And we really hope that our program not only helps you pass, but helps you pass with confidence and leaves you in a position that you're ready to be an independent practicing clinician. So with that being said, good luck and on with your studies. Thanks. Bye.